Africa has always been rich in resources, but one of its most powerful levers has always been uranium. For decades, countries like France relied on this mineral to fuel their nuclear plants, their industries, their energy, and ultimately their power. But now, something dramatic is unfolding. Africa is no longer content with being the silent supplier that others exploit. Leaders are standing taller, voices are growing louder, and decisions are being made that shake the very foundation of Europe's energy security. Imagine France, a country that prides itself on being one of the largest producers of nuclear energy in the world, suddenly realizing that its grip is loosening. Those reactors, those industries, that sense of control, all dependent on a steady flow of uranium from African soil. When that tap starts to tighten, when shipments no longer arrive the way they used to, it is not just an energy crisis. It's a symbol of power shifting hands. For Africa, this isn't simply about cutting uranium exports. It's about dignity. It's about saying no more to being treated like a warehouse of raw materials while their people live in poverty. It's about sovereignty, about standing up to the old colonial powers that once dictated the rules. There's a certain pride in this decision, a sense of reclaiming what was always theirs. You can almost feel the weight lifting off their shoulders, the unspoken words, "We are not your suppliers anymore. We are nations with a voice, with choices." At the same time, you can picture the anxiety inside France's corridors of power. Energy executives nervously shuffling papers, politicians holding urgent meetings, news channels framing it as an emergency. The French public might not fully grasp it at first, but slowly they begin to realize that their electricity, their jobs, industries, are tied to decisions being made thousands of miles away by leaders who now feel empowered. And there's something almost poetic about it. For so long, Africa was told it couldn't stand on its own, that it needed guidance, that it was dependent. Now the tables are turning. It's France that is being forced to adapt, to face vulnerability, to look in the mirror and see how dependent it has become on those it once sought to control. This shift is more than just economics or energy. It is deeply emotional. It's about generations of Africans finally asserting themselves, finally watching the world pay attention, not because of pity, but because of power. You can sense the pride swelling in cities and villages, quiet conversations where people smile and say, "Things are changing." And in a way, they're right. Things are changing. They've already changed. Africa's uranium cuts symbolize far more than a disruption of supply chains. They represent a powerful moment of self-assertion, a stand that shakes the global stage and challenges the centuries-old narrative of dependency. For decades, Africa's natural wealth has flowed outward, enriching foreign nations while leaving much of the continent in struggle. Now, by deliberately cutting uranium supplies, Africa is telling the world the rules have changed. This is no longer the Africa of silence and submission. This is the Africa of choice, of pride, and of sovereignty. Imagine the weight of that moment for ordinary Africans. For so long, uranium, the fuel that powers nuclear plants, the backbone of modern industry, was extracted with little thought for the people who lived above those mines. It was treated as just another resource for export, as if the land and the people were secondary. But now, when African leaders and nations decide to restrict its flow, they are not only influencing markets, they are reclaiming dignity. It is like a homeowner finally saying to long-term guests who took everything for granted, "This house belongs to me, and I will decide what leaves its doors." The symbolism here runs deeper than economics. It is about sovereignty, the right of a people to determine their own destiny without being cornered or dictated to. Uranium is not just rock pulled from the ground, it is a source of global power. And when Africa makes decisions about it, the ripple travels across continents. It tells nations that once held unquestioned authority, your influence here is not eternal. It gives the African youth who watch this unfold a sense of ownership over their future. They see that their countries are not just pawns in someone else's game, but players with their own strategies. There is also a sense of pride building across the continent. Pride in knowing that Africa can use its resources not as shackles, but as leverage. For the first time in generations, Leaders are starting to recognize that power is not always about armies or speeches. It can come from the quiet decision to withhold, to protect, to choose when and how to share what the land has given. That kind of pride trickles down into conversations in homes and markets. People talk differently when they know their country stands tall. They feel less like subjects of outside forces and more like authors of their own story. Of course, the move creates shockwaves abroad. Countries that once took for granted an endless flow of African uranium suddenly find themselves scrambling. And within that scramble lies another message. Africa's resources are not infinite gifts waiting on the table. They are treasures tied to the choices of sovereign states. The world is being reminded, sometimes painfully, that respect must accompany trade and partnership must replace exploitation. The shift pushes the conversation away from dependency and toward balance. What makes this moment so emotional is the history it carries. Africa has known exploitation so deep that the wounds still echo in its people's lives. Generations have watched trains loaded with their wealth leaving the continent while they remained in poverty. Every cut in uranium supply feels like a wound being stitched shut, feels like a long overdue healing, a declaration that enough is enough. That is why this action, simple on paper, is powerful in spirit, symbolizes resilience. It is a sign that the continent no longer wants to be seen as a resource pit, but as a partner with equal voice and equal respect for the people of Africa. This is not just about uranium, nor even about economics. It is about the deep, burning desire to finally shape their own destiny. It is about teaching future generations that sovereignty is not a gift from the powerful. It is a right earned by standing firm. It is about breaking the old patterns where others dictated the rules, and Africa complied by controlling the flow of uranium. African nations are saying, we decide when to open the door, and we decide when to close it. And that message is spreading not only across Africa, but across the world. It inspires those who have long been marginalized to believe in their own strength. It forces powerful nations to rethink their strategies and reconsider how they engage. With the continent, it brings a breath of fresh air, a reminder that even in the midst of struggle, dignity can be reclaimed. This is the emotional weight behind the uranium cuts. It is more than economics, more than industry, it is the heartbeat of a continent reminding itself and the world of its power, its pride, and its right to sovereignty. France today finds itself standing in a place it never imagined, facing the harsh reality of industrial and energy vulnerability. For decades, it enjoyed the comfort of stability, powered by uranium supplies from Africa that seemed as certain as the sunrise. Those supplies fed its nuclear plants, which in turn powered homes, factories, and industries across the nation. But now, that certainty has been shaken. The sudden shift in uranium availability has left cracks in the foundation, and the effects are being felt not only in Paris boardrooms, but in everyday life. Think of a family sitting down at the dinner table in France, discussing rising energy bills or news of factories slowing production. These are not abstract issues anymore. They are personal. They creep into conversations in kitchens, cafes, and workplaces. The feeling of security that came with reliable energy is slipping, and with it comes an undercurrent of anxiety. People are beginning to realize how much of their modern comfort rested on a fragile chain that stretched far beyond their borders, industries to feel the sting. Steel plants, car manufacturers, chemical factories, so many parts of the French economy rely heavily on the consistent and affordable power that nuclear energy provides. When uranium supplies falter, it is not just a question of numbers on a spreadsheet. It is the hum of machines slowing down, the uncertainty of jobs hanging. In the balance, the fear of competitiveness fading in a world that never waits. Workers sense it in their paychecks, managers see it in their budgets, the nation feels it in its pride. What is striking here is the vulnerability of a country long considered strong and secure. France has always projected itself as a leader in technology, in energy, in diplomacy. The very industries that fuel its influence are showing cracks because of reliance on resources it does not fully control. That is a sobering thought for many citizens who are beginning to ask whether the image of power matches the reality. For them, this is more than politics. It is about whether their children will grow up in a nation that can truly stand on its own feet. The energy crisis adds a human element that is hard to ignore. Rising costs affect ordinary families most. When electricity bills climb, when factories slow down and jobs are at risk, it hits the middle class and working people hardest. There is a sense of unfairness in knowing that decisions and dependencies created at the top filter down into the struggles of daily life. It becomes personal, and emotions like frustration and helplessness begin to take hold. People want to know, why are we here, and what will be done to protect us? At the same time, the vulnerability exposes something that has long been hidden: how interconnected the world really is. The lights in French homes glow because of minerals mined thousands of miles away in African soil. The heartbeat of French industry depends on decisions made in faraway capitals. That realization is humbling, even uncomfortable. It forces people to see that power is not always about what a country builds within its borders, but about the relationships and dependencies it maintains outside them. For France, the situation feels almost like standing at a crossroads. On one side, there is the path of denial, pretending that this vulnerability is temporary and that things will return to normal. On the other side lies the difficult path of reckoning, acknowledging that energy security must be reimagined, that industries must adapt, and that sovereignty cannot rest on the goodwill of others forever. This is not just about uranium, it is about resilience, about whether France can learn to stand firm when old certainties crumble. The emotional weight of this moment is not lost on ordinary people. They feel the vulnerability in their bones. In the quiet worries about the future, will their jobs be safe? Will the cost of living continue to rise? Will France remain a strong player on the global stage? Or will it stumble under the weight of its dependencies? These are not questions that can be answered with statistics alone. They require a deeper reckoning, one that blends economics with humanity, policy with pride. This is the vulnerability France faces today. It is industrial, it is energetic, but above all, it is emotional. It touches not just the machinery of the state, but the daily lives of the people who keep that state alive. It is a reminder that strength built on dependency is fragile, and that even the most powerful nations can find themselves exposed when the foundations shift beneath their feet. Across Africa, there is a wind of change moving through villages, cities, and capitals, a feeling that the old weight of dependency is finally beginning to lift. For generations, many African nations were told their destiny was tied to others, that their resources were meant to fuel industries and economies far beyond their own borders. Uranium, gold, oil, cocoa, and countless other treasures were shipped away while people at home were left with little more than promises. But today, something different is happening. A new kind of pride is rising, one carried not only by leaders in presidential offices, but by ordinary people in marketplaces, schools, and family gatherings. You can almost feel it in conversations. Young Africans speak with more confidence about their continent's future, no longer bound to the same narratives their parents and grandparents grew up with. For them, refusing to be dependent on former colonial powers is not just politics. It is dignity. It is the ability to say, we are no longer trapped in someone else's story. This generational pride is not loud arrogance. It is quiet, but firm. It is the smile of a farmer who knows his land's produce is finally being valued at home. The determination of a student who believes Africa's wealth should fuel African progress, and the resolve of communities that want to stand on their own terms. There is also an emotional layer to this shift. For too long, dependency carried a shadow of humiliation. Families knew their land was rich, but the wealth rarely stayed to build schools, hospitals, or roads. People watched foreign companies prosper while their own children walked miles for water or studied under weak lamps. That created a painful contradiction, knowing you are sitting on treasure while living with scarcity. Breaking away from those patterns brings relief, even healing. It is like finally breathing freely after years of holding your breath.